magic, heart-eating ghouls, fart jokes. They're all inside this happy book. Throne of the Crescent Moon by Saladin Ahmed is an Islamic-based fantasy about monsters and magic. It follows the monster hunter, and I will apologise now for probably mispronouncing every single name in this because I couldn't find a pronunciation guide. So monster hunter Abdullah Maxlud, who is called to investigate a group of ghouls that murdered the family of a woman he's in love with. However, he and his apprentice, Rashid Basrashid, soon realise that this is more than just a pack of ghouls and that a greater threat is coming for the city of Damsawat. They are joined by Zamia Banu Layth Badawi, a tribeswoman from the desert, an alchemist and a magus, and together they try to take down the one behind the attacks and save the city. So it is your sort of standard fare fantasy, but it seems to have a more Islamic flavour than most fantasy books, so that's fun. Firstly, I really like the characters. I loved the range of opinions and stances across the main cast and how they clashed over certain ideals. Abdullah is old and tired and a bit of a slob in some respects. He's obsessed with books and learning and likes nothing more than sitting down with a cup of cardamom tea and an almond pastry. Rashid is an extremely pious young man, brought up in a warrior guild of God and constantly struggles with morality, when his loyalty to certain characters requires him to do something that goes against what he's been taught or what's in the holy book of this world, which the name of which I have forgotten, but never mind. Zamia is just small and angry, seeking revenge almost to a fault. And then the other two characters, Litaz and Dawood, are a married couple from the Sioux Republic who use their magic to aid Abdullah. Litaz is the alchemist who is instrumental in forcing Rashid to question his own calling, and Dawood is a magus who is able to heal and attack ghouls, but every spell takes time from his life. They all play an important role in the band of friends, and it's a really enjoyable reading about all the ways they agree and disagree. Arguably, the disagreements are a little long at times and somewhat repetitive, but they were still believable and came from a place of differing opinions as opposed to miscommunication or ignorance, which was a nice change from what you usually get. The final character worth mentioning is Farad Az-Hamaz, or the Falcon Prince, and he is basically Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to help the poor, stopping 2-year-olds from being executed in public, and working to take down the corrupt caliph, who's like a king, from overtaxing the struggling city. But he's not as clean-cut good as most Robin Hood characters are shown to be, and he's capable of cruelty and murder as well. And that's what I really liked about the characters. They're all shades of grey, in a way. None of them are paragons, each having their own pitfalls and flaws which they struggle to overcome. No one is perfect, and sometimes their own ideas of good and bad, who should be punished and who should be saved, clash, which leads to arguments and discussions which aren't always resolved. And that's fine, because the world isn't split into objective good and evil. Everything, or most things, are subjective. And I like that this book remembers that with its characters. For example, Abdullah likes the Falcon Prince, admiring how he aids the poor and downtrodden. Rashid hates him, because he's still a criminal, steals from honest people, and isn't above murder. You may agree or disagree with some of the characters, but no one is painted as being overtly wrong for their opinions. Stubborn, yes, and they are forced to confront certain aspects of themselves over the course of the book, but they aren't bad people because of it. The description of setting and place is pretty good as well. The author, Ahmed, is liberal in his use of the senses to get across the idea of the city, its smells, its sounds, and its tastes. One understands how poor and dirty some of the places are, and how this contrasts with the opulence of the palace and the richer quarters. I also really liked some of the descriptions of the ghouls. One I remember quite vividly is of a bone ghoul that Rashid slashes, and when he cuts it, it bleeds maggots instead of blood, which is just horrible, but I thought was really, really good. Leading on from the description, I also really liked the world that Ahmed created for the book. Although it's set in a made-up fantasy land, it's clearly based on Islamic culture and religion, as everything from the names to clothes to the food is absolutely steeped in it. It made the world really stand out compared to a lot of other fantasy novels, mostly those based on medieval Europe, as it felt fresh and exciting. I also loved how the magic was involved in almost every aspect of the culture. It felt like a constant presence, used in a variety of ways to suit a variety of needs. Adula uses vials of things like crushed silver and his own blood to create ghoul-killing bombs, I guess, which seem to be activated by praying to God. Litaz, the alchemist, uses various ingredients to glean information out of other substances. Dawood can weave healing spells with his hands and stop ghouls with flashes of light. And even just in the background, there are spells to decode ciphers, spells to keep clothes from getting dirty, even spells to waft bad smells from the tanners in the city into the poorer quarters so as not to defile the noses of the rich. The magic felt, in a way, more tangible and present. And I also loved all the monsters. This book is about monster hunters, and there is no shortage of mentions of monsters. The main ones we see are ghouls, which are creatures made by man for evil purposes and feast on the hearts of their victims. There seem to be lots of different types of ghouls. The ones mentioned are water ghouls, sand ghouls, bone ghouls, and skin ghouls. And when a ghoul is killed, it reverts back to the materials from which it was crafted. So, for example, bone ghouls are made from grave soil and maggots. Sand ghouls are made from sand and like scorpions and stuff. Skin ghouls the worst. They're made from people and are basically unkillable zombies and are horrifying, and I didn't like them. The book also mentions things like djenns, which seems to just be a alternative spelling of jinns or genie, which I thought was interesting. And cyclops, there's great golden serpents, all sorts of like monsters mentioned. I would have liked more stuff about the djenns because I found them quite interesting. They're also called the 1001 in this, which I think is a great name. But I think djenns come up more in the second book, which I only just realised exists. So, I don't know if I'll read it, maybe I will. Whereas the description of inanimate objects in this book was pretty good, the action was sadly lacking. Fight scenes somewhat flat and feel more like a list of actions than an actual scene. They weren't particularly immersive, nor were they grounded, which made them weirdly sort of difficult to follow. There are sort of really three, I suppose, proper fight scenes I can think of, all of which focus on Rashid as he's the one with the sword. The other characters rely on magic or lion shifting to fight, and they were underwhelming. It's not so much a problem for most of the book, but the fight scene at the end was very disappointing after the amount of build-up to it. And it's not just the fight scenes. Action in general was quite flat, and this also extends to characters just doing stuff, walking through town, making potions, all of that. The writing is a little fussy, with sentences often being too long, or starting with odd clauses that made the action difficult to follow. I imagine these are probably attempts to keep the sentence structure from being too monotonous and therefore making the prose flat, which is a good thing to do, but you have to be really careful not to sacrifice clarity in the process. It also didn't help that sometimes the action would just stop to explain something to the reader, sometimes about like, the layout of the city or the gates or how this one song got banned, and it's stuff that we didn't really need explained to us. Readers are far more perceptive than sometimes we give them credit for, and can continue reading without all the information. You don't need to know all. The worst example of this was halfway through a conversation where another character either cuts off or replies sharply to someone else. But before they reply, we have a paragraph of why this character disagrees and is going to reply, which completely slowed down the moment of dialogue and made it feel as though the conversation just sort of stopped whilst the character thought for a moment, when I think the conversation was meant to be fast-paced and fluid. So that was a bit irritating. And continuing on from this, actually, the magic system was woefully unexplored. I did put the magic system in the prose because I did like what was there, but there wasn't a lot of foundation, I guess. And this wasn't always a problem in the book. I didn't mind not understanding the background magic and the less tangible forms like Dawood's magic light shows, but when it came to Litaz's alchemy and Adula's vials, I wanted more explanation. I wanted to know what the ingredients were and their effects. I wanted to understand the connection between the magic and God. Why does the doodly need to say a prayer or a line from scripture whenever he uses vials to destroy ghouls, when no one else does this when they use magic? Is it because he's a monster hunter, or just chooses to pray because it makes him feel more confident? He uses at one point a tracking spell, and it seems that God just like whispers in his ear which way to go. So why do you need all these ingredients and vials in the first place? Is prayer not enough on its own? I would also have liked a little more backstory on God, the sort of religion, and the traitorous angel, which I'm imagining is sort of like Lucifer. There is actually a short story called Where Virtue Lies, set I think before this book, but I've not read it, and it only seems to be like a online story, and I figured I didn't need to. So maybe it's explored in that, but I would have liked it in the main book as well. I didn't get on with the dialogue. Sometimes it was okay, but I found, on the whole, it was quite inconsistent. At times, very formal, probably because of the culture described. This very proper and specific ways of greeting and speaking to people. But it sort of clashed when they were informal with each other, and some of the phrasing felt a little bit modern. Zamia, the tribeswoman, is very informal for the most part, as she didn't grow up in the city, but has some moments of dialogue that sounded very proper, almost Tolkien-esque, which contrasted with the rest of the dialogue in the whole book. I suppose it was a little jarring, an attempt at oldie-worldy, but a little too modern at times. And the two can be mixed, of course, but it does require a sort of stable middle ground that you can dip in and out of at suitable times, which this book just missed. I don't think it missed it by a lot. I don't think we're taking very much for the dialogue just to be made a little bit more consistent, but it still missed it, so that's a bit of a shame. Finally, the romance was just weird. I love romance, it's my favourite thing, and I'm always hyped whenever I realise a book is going to have a romantic subplot. I've sort of given up on romance as a main genre because it always sucks, but as a subplot it usually has more hope. But in this, it was just weird. The two romantic leads, I guess, are Zamia and Rashid, and the book only seems to take place over a few days, I think. The timescale wasn't that great now I think about it. But anyway, they just meet, and already they seem to like each other from the get-go. Zamia thinks Rashid is pretty, even though he's overly pious and somewhat disagreeable when people do something he disagrees with. That was a good sentence. Rashid doesn't think Zamia is pretty. The prose is very explicit in saying how plain she is, but she has nice emerald green eyes, so there's that. But he respects her bloodlust and finds her obsession with revenge very attractive. They then proceed to not really talk to each other very much, avoid eye contact, but everyone around them knows that Rashid is totally in love with her, and Zamia spends far more time than is reasonable in such a small book thinking about how she's missed her chance at a simple life as a housewife and courting and stuff like that. Like, woman, your entire tribe was murdered horribly. Why are you thinking about romance so much? Why does this always happen? Guys, now is not the time.
We're in a war, man!
So when she does bring up marriage to Rashid halfway through the book, it just sort of feels random and sudden and not appropriate considering the horrible ghouls eating people's hearts and souls. Priorities, guys. The group discover information about something called the Throne of the Crescent Moon, which is in the palace where the Caliph lives. The Caliph, by the way, is like terrible, horrible. Basically, if this was Robin Hood, the Caliph would be a cross between the Sheriff of Nottingham and like Prince John. Whereas his dad, the previous Caliph, was actually quite nice, so. Anyway, the Throne of the Crescent Moon is actually an old Kemeti Cobra throne. The Kemeti people were like people who lived there before, and all the ruins in the book are the Kemeti ruins. So the Cobra throne contains the powers of the traitorous angel, and they can be gained by spilling and then drinking the blood of the heir to the throne. Now, a lot of the victims in the book have been, yes, attacked by ghouls and had their hearts eaten, which is a typical ghoul thing, but they're also having their souls extracted from their bodies, which is less normal. And they realise that there is a shadow creature drinking the souls, and its name is Mauawa. I think that's how you pronounce it. A jackal-headed being, once a man called Hadu Nawaz, who, like, when he was alive, murderized children for sick magic powers, but was caught, imprisoned for life, and given the name Mau Awa, meaning child scythe, to hide his identity. The person who brought back Mau Awa is a guy called Orshado, and they realise that he plans to murderize the heir on the throne on the shortest day to gain the dark angel powers and use them to murderize everyone. So basically, plot to destroy the city and kill everyone with evil powers. We gotta stop him. They go to the palace, but the minister won't let them in. Instead, he leads them to this dingy old house where they find the Falcon Prince, who is staging a coup to take out the Caliph. There's an argument about which is more horrifying, letting people on the streets die of poverty, or the horrible ghoul things ripping out people's hearts and slurping their souls like spaghetti. They sneak into the palace via secret underground tunnels to take down the Caliph, but he has a few tricks up his sleeve and separates everyone using false walls. The Falcon Prince and Adula end up finding the heir, a boy of 8, who surprises old Bird Boy by claiming to be his biggest fan and makes him vow to kill his horrible father because he's a big meanie who totally murdered his mum for making goo-goo eyes at someone else. As you do. The prince is, well, the Falcon Prince is confused, as he had been totally ready to rip the heir a new one for being related to the Caliph, but he's pleased. They find the throne room just in time for the finale. Orshado turns up with a severed head, which turns everyone apart from the main characters into skin ghouls, which are the unkillable zombies. You chop off a head, it just puts the head back on again. You can't stop them. Orshado stabs the 8-year-old heir. The jackal-headed Mau Awa starts sucking out Adula's soul, but Rashid and the others burst in before his heart is ripped out. Zamia takes down the jackal guy, thus avenging her dead tribe. And Rashid pulls the barely alive Adula onto the throne, and the Falcon Prince presses a secret button which makes the throne rise up into a small chamber above the throne room, taking Rashid, Adula, the Falcon Prince, the heir, and Orshado with it. Orshado does some magic which sends Rashid into a world of existential crisis where he is haunted by the people he has killed, citing a verse of the Holy Scriptures about how murder is bad. He gets over this by remembering that the people he killed had been totally evil, breaks out of the existential crisis world, and murderizes Orshado. The skin ghouls are thwarted and the day is saved. Except not really, because when the throne, minus Rashid and Orshado, enters the sealing chamber, Adula, revived by the death of the villains, is horrified to find the Falcon Prince has drunk the now dead heir's blood, thus gaining the tainted powers of the throne and the traitorous angel. The Falcon Prince is all, "It's fine, bro. I'll totally use these powers for good. The heir wanted me to do this, and I wasn't the one who stabbed him, so it's fine. Trust me." Whilst blood drips from his mouth, but there we go. Adula begrudgingly accepts this as this way the Falcon Prince can assume the throne and hopefully change the world for the better without starting a war. So he agrees to tell no one what he's done. They go to a tea shop afterwards to mope. Dawood and Lizat's house is burnt down, so they decide to start off back to the Sioux Republic, where they both hail from. Rashid tells Zamia he can't marry her because he doesn't know what he wants out of life anymore. Adula decides to hang up the white kaftan and marry the girl he loves, Miri. The end. So the ending is pretty anticlimactic. It happens very quickly, without that much struggle, really, and the only characters who seem to do anything in the final fight are Rashid and Zamia, and both of their battles are over very quickly. The villain, who was built up to over the entire book, died extremely fast after achieving very little. He stabbed a kid and got his head lopped off. It's almost laughable. And whilst I did like Rashid's existential crisis with the ghosts of the people he'd killed haunting him, it didn't feel earned, which is odd because there was build-up to this moment. Throughout the book he questions his own morality and teachings, but mostly in regards to small things like accepting stolen goods and choosing to defend someone from the humble students, who are basically religious extremists who brutally attack anyone they perceive as sinful. Not murdering bad guys. He doesn't seem to have a problem with that. And he's pretty happy to whip out his sword and fight people whenever, so... And he doesn't seem to worry that much about things he did in the past, so I suppose the scene at the end focused on a quandary he didn't really have as much. I was also expecting at least one of the main characters to die, as death seems to be at the forefront of most of their minds. Adula is thinking about retiring if he survives. Dawood is aging fast because of his magic and worries about surviving this encounter. Litaz is hoping she'll live to return to her home in the Sioux Republic. Zamia is ready to accept death as long as she avenges her tribe. But no one dies, which honestly surprised me. I suppose I'm so used to fiction and media killing people off left, right and centre to shock the audience that the mere act of letting them all live is in itself shocking. So, you know, there we go. But I will say that choosing to have the Falcon Prince actually drink the blood and assume the Nebula's dark powers was gutsy, and I admire this book for doing that. Whilst Adula and the Falcon Prince were talking about the decision, and Adula was wondering what the correct action to take would be, I was also wondering alongside him, because I didn't know the answer. There was no obvious moral choice. Either let the Falcon Prince become Caliph of these dark powers, or tell people and risk the city falling into war, likely resulting in the death of thousands. So maybe it wasn't as neat, cut and clean as an ending as people would have liked, but I've got to admire that the author made the decision to end it as he did, as not many people would have the courage to do so. Thrown to the Crescent Moon is nearly a really good standalone fantasy book. There are just a few qualms that honestly probably wouldn't be too difficult to fix. First, either give Rashid and Zamia more time together to establish a bond between them, or take the romance out altogether. Second, add a little bit of lore and history to establish the magic and the threat. There are, by the way, two characters who don't understand magic in this, Rashid and Zamia. Rashid is frequently amazed by Adula's magic, and Zamia actually fears some magic and calls it evil. And these two would have made fine stand-ins for the reader to have magic explained to them. Third, another couple of drafts of the stricter editor or workshop group would hopefully get rid of the inconsistencies with the dialogue and make the action scenes easier to follow. Fourth, the ending, as I said, it was anticlimactic and actually a little empty. The build-up didn't really pay off and everything happened too quickly. We needed more emotion and just more action, really. The characters who didn't do much needed a chance to shine. Perhaps instead of jumping at the end of each individual battle, the POV should have shifted during fight scenes to rack up tension. So yeah, all in all, it's a fine book. It has its issues, yes, but it's also the first proper book that this author has written, as far as I can tell. He seems to have done a ton of short stories and comics, though, according to his Goodreads, and I'm sure as he continues to write, he'll only get better. I would recommend this book to anyone who likes fantasy and is looking for something that isn't just wizards, knights, and dragons. So yeah, that's it for this week. Bye.